So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. Not graphic design, but how do we maximize the content's SEO value? And so to give you a little bit about my background, Tyler kind of teed it up. I'm an award-winning marketer, which if you're going to win one, you might as well tell people about it. Otherwise, what kind of marketer are you? And I'm the CMO, head of marketing for Ezoic. I founded Google's Pubtelligence, which is an event hosted for publishers around the world at Google offices. And I serve as a digital expert for startup competitions and things like that. The state of Missouri, which is where I'm from originally and where I started my first business, I actually would judge startup competitions based on their marketing strategies and things like that as a part of the criteria. And the state of Missouri would give a $50,000 equity-free grant to organizations that would win these. And so throughout time, I'd get involved in the ones that I really liked and would help them grow. And really the story of what kind of my career story is really the story of content marketing and SEO, because that strategy has really been the one that I've used to grow businesses in many cases, from it just being me to it being me and a handful of other people in most instances. I'm also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if there's any other Jiu-Jitsu people there, yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to train this week. And if there's no other Jiu-Jitsu people there, then sorry we didn't get to train this week. But either way, you'll see on there as well that I'm a semi-retired magician. It's because when I used to do presentations, I would do magic. It was very underwhelming for most people, so I've cut it out. On top of that, doing magic remotely, I think would be even more underwhelming. So yeah, I think we are going to benefit from the fact that I'm not doing any magic today. But what I am going to try to cover is, where do you start when you don't know SEO from COVID, the coronavirus? So there's even a typo in there. That's great. So basically, like, if you don't know anything about SEO, that's fine. I think that where I'm going to start today is going to make it really easy. And honestly, the things that I'll give you in terms of things that you can do with this will make it really actionable. If you know everything there is to know about SEO, I think that I'll offer some unique tools and insights and things that have worked really well that I think will be actionable as well. I'm going to speak a lot about expertise today and how to think about it. And I'm going to talk about how to gather and use that expertise to make valuable content that ranks well in search. I'm going to talk about how to leverage the value of that content for SEO. And I'm also going to show you different ways that URLs and content in general can be used to drive authority and build authority for different types of audiences, and how to think about that. I think anybody that has some kind of understanding of SEO understands that domain authority or even author authority can play a role, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into how that works and like how to actually create it if you don't have it right now. So I mentioned before that my first skill was really kind of like growing content and using this as like kind of the springboard for a lot of organizations that I started. And kind of that starts with Live Anew, which is the very first company that I ever was a part of. So Live Anew was the brainchild of a gentleman by the name of Louis Ray. And Louis was a partner at Edward Jones, which is a large financial firm in the Midwest. And Louis had this dream of creating an organization that was built around the principles of positive psychology. Organizations that do that today, that were competitors of ours back then, are organizations like the Gallup organization, which you often see in polling. They do a lot of polling around like what are the happiest countries and things like that. And so it was a very unique and new space, but Louis had went out and got a degree in what's called applied positive psychology. And it was started by a gentleman by the name of Martin Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania. And he was one of the first 30 people to ever go through that course. Former U.S. Senator John Kerry, a professional comedian Yakov Smirnoff, based out of Branson, Missouri, surprisingly enough. There were some of the other people in the class. So Louis was kind of in a rare audience there. And so he had started this business and he needed a young hotshot internet marketer, which I happened to be in school at the time. I had heard about the company, reached out to Louis, and he wanted to work with me primarily because I had done some things at school that had gotten attention in the school paper. I also happened to be the editor of the school paper at the time. So I kind of pushed my own agenda there. But either way, I'd walked into this engagement with Louis, and really we didn't actually know how to create any customers because there wasn't really any business like ours. But I did know that Louis was an expert in positive psychology. And when he talked about it, people were usually fascinated. So I thought, well, the internet is growing. This is at a time whenever, Google search and, social media were not really kind of tried and true marketing channels. They were kind of emerging. And so I had the idea of like, let's take this knowledge that Louis has, let's put it on the internet, because the people that will be trying to find it will be the people that we essentially want to try to sell our products to. And that's really where we started. And what I would do is I would just interview Louis and I would write down basically the things that he would talk about. And I would say, well, what are our customers? What is it that they're trying to figure out? What do they want to know? And he would say, well, they think they want to know this, but what they really want to know is that. And we'd start to collect this information. We built an education system where we would say, well, this is our 101 information. This is our 201. This is our 301. And we created content with all that information. And basically we wanted to figure out like anybody that was looking for positive psychology and how they could apply it to the workplace or apply it to financial advice or anything that kind of was in the vertical healthcare that we were focused on. We wanted to create that. And so Louis actually didn't believe in this at all. He thought it was going to be this huge waste of time because he thought the way that you would sell a product was to call people on the phone, which is basically what Edward Jones had done forever. It's what Louis had become a multi-millionaire doing throughout the course of his career. But I was sure that it was really the thing that was going to make us different was the ability to differentiate what we were doing from what other people were doing. And that was Louis. And I couldn't call people on the phone and show them Louis and show them our expertise. And so even if I could call somebody, I knew what I'd want to do is send them to our website. And so I started tapping into reliable SEO articles to ensure that I basically wasn't wasting my time putting this content on the internet, but I would just try to get lists and I'd send people this content. And eventually I would get down our weblog files and find out, hey, there's people that are actually searching for our content and finding it on these search engines. And so basically we built up this resource of expertise online. And what I think is really interesting is kind of going through this exercise of creating this presentation. I was researching positive psychology for some graphics, and I realized Livinoo still ranks like super high for the word positive psychology. And this content was written, 12 years ago. And on top of that, what makes it really interesting to me is that the company, we sold it probably 9 years ago. And so, most of the it's not mobile friendly. It's outdated. There's all these different, it's really short. There's no images or media. So there's a lot of reasons why you could look at in the modern era, why this content shouldn't rank high. Like you can look at all the on-page things, and you can even look at backlinks and stuff, which I'm sure it does not have a ton of backlinks because we didn't ever build any then. There's nobody sending content to it now. But the biggest thing is that it's written with true expertise. Louis is still to this day one of the leading experts in positive psychology. And this content included still unique insights that I doubt that anybody else is really speaking to in the same way today. And so that's one of the things that I kind of honed in on in my experience at Livinoo, is just how important it was to capture expertise and make it unique and different. And so after Livinoo, I started working with the startup community in St. Louis. I had different competitions that I would get involved with, and I ran into Brian Sappett. And Brian was a brilliant engineer, one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever been around or worked with. But Brian hated people. he hated people more than anyone that I've ever met in my entire life. He just had no tolerance for them. That's the best way I could describe it. I'm sure we all probably know somebody that kind of falls in that category, but Brian and I kind of hit it off. So I was one person that Brian could tolerate. And basically one of the things that I found really fascinating about him was whenever he would meet with a customer, because he basically would build manufacturing software that everyone in manufacturing would want or need, and no one had ever built yet. And so he would just go out and build these things. But he was terrible at sales and marketing because his salespeople, he'd never given the time of day to explain the value of the software. And he would never be bothered enough to actually sit with customers to sell them the product. And so he just always thought people should just buy the stuff that he had because it's the best stuff. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work out that way. But most of the people that were providing content around the stuff that Brian was selling were doing a really bad job. They were just really bad corporate blogs that had very little effort put into them. You could tell that they had probably hired somebody to do, some level of content, and there was just no, the best way I could put it, there's just no heart in it. There was no care of whether or not it worked well or not. Somebody was just checking a box. And so when I first started kind of talking to Brian about working for Datix and taking some equity in their business and helping them grow, the first thing I started Googling was, best ERP software, best CRM consulting. And I realized, I think we could probably rank number one for this. And Datix was a small 5-person company. And the reason I thought that was because my experience at Livenue had shown me if you could create this great expert content, you can usually disrupt stuff that's not as well put together. And this is still, 6-7 years ago. Now, if you search for the best kind of software, you're going to get these garbage results like G2 and things like that. But for the most part, back then, it was very much an open space. And so things like ERP consulting, those were things that we owned. And this was a space that was dominated by parties like Deloitte and other big organizations like that. And to this day, Datix, which again has been bought and sold since I've been there, which the content on those pages isn't great anymore. They've been changed. They've diluted a lot of the value there. They still rank super high for these terms. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we built expert content there and it's existed there for a long time. But the thing is we weren't doing a lot of the things that you see in here today. We weren't buying backlinks. We weren't going out and sending people emails saying, hey, I see you wrote a really great article about ERP consulting. Would you mind linking to my article about ERP consulting? I'm sure some of you have gotten those. Some of you may be familiar with them. And so those were revelations that I had over time. And I had other stops in my career, businesses that I had helped, and I'd applied a lot of those principles. And one of the things that I would learn is over time, I'd grow these teams and I'd have to have teams of people start doing the same things. So I started developing processes, and not only that, started getting a lot more research. I started working at Ezoic eventually and started being able to access data and insights, working with Google as a partner. And so all of a sudden I started to be able to get these kind of more behind the scenes understandings of not just how to make these processes work for everyone, but to also understand sort of the logic behind them and why they work the way that they do, and understanding some of the nuances in between. So when I first started with Ezoic, we weren't the company that we are today. We've grown exponentially in the last 4 or 5 years. So I had a completely clean slate, and I knew what formula was going to work in terms of helping us grow. But I didn't have access to one-to-one interviews with anyone anymore. Dwayne, our CEO, is like one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's like a Mark Zuckerberg level genius, but he suffers from the same affliction that Brian does, is that he has a low tolerance for people. And nor did he really have the time to sit with me and go over different things about the ad industry. Some of these things are things that I've picked up and known because it's a little bit more familiar to me than manufacturing. But I had another resource that was really valuable, and that was data. So you can see kind of our keyword growth here since basically when I started, which was in the middle of August. And you can see it's, exponential keyword growth. But I'll point out, just going back here, some of the types of content that we would produce. This is some of the more recent stuff, but we do tons of this, which is we just pull down data. So Ezoic integrates with thousands and thousands of websites across the internet, tens of thousands in many cases. So we have tons of data on all kinds of stuff: user experience, page speed, ad revenue. And we can look at how all these things correlate with each other. And so we just pull down the data, and then we will use that to publish articles about things and create narratives. And so even when I didn't have access to experts, I usually could get access to data. And if I wouldn't have access to data, I would usually talk to customers and then find out what is it that our customers like or they enjoy, or what has made them successful. And then usually from there, you can extract expertise directly from them. Not only that, you can feed that back to your product teams and things like that, and better understand, how do you market a product, or how would you market a new product given the information that you now have from your customers. So that's the growth. And it was at this point that we start working on the Google Pubtelligence events, and I get a chance to start working with the Google Webmaster team a little bit. And, when they're pretty tight to the vest with just about everything, as you would imagine. But, you get a chance to start picking their brains when you sit in a room with them for a long period of time and organizing events. And recently they published something that I'd had a conversation with Ilya Grigorik, who any of you that are like SEO nerds may be somewhat familiar. He's one of the leaders on the Google Webmaster team. And Ilya had talked a lot about this idea of search satisfaction, and it being the kind of like, the golden rule for Google search, and the thing that they're always building around. And I found it really interesting because he mentioned it so many times in the conversation that it made it clear to me that this is a metric that they have. They have some kind of composite known as search satisfaction. And so whenever we started talking about it, I would start to listen a little bit more closely about what types of things played into it. And one of the biggest ones was he kept talking about expertise. He talked about expertise and being able to do a good job of providing people access to expertise. And so it was interesting to me because it kind of went full circle with a lot of the things that I'd been learning over time and been able to successfully apply. And so there's really three ways that you can kind of define this sort of expertise in the terms of something like Google search being able to evaluate it. So things like unique data, advice, or knowledge. So data, subjective advice or knowledge that comes from a source. So going into two, an expert contributor, writer, or source of information that could be verified as trustworthy. And then third is just historical or proven track record, basically, of being able to provide that sort of information. So in SEO terms, it looks something like, what you would probably consider on-page content optimization, changing images, changing content, changing the structure, adding, different types of markup to a page, whether it's just the tags like bolding the text or adding different types of headings, all the way down to adding things like rich data or schema markup, which some of you may be familiar with, which I'll touch on a little bit. But then delving into things like authority and what types of links are on the page and where do they go, and what types of links are coming inbound to the page. And then also what types of natural language. So Google, some of you may be familiar with natural language matching and some of the things that Google does there in terms of machine learning. But Google will actually try to tie different types of entities on the page together. Entities being things like a golf bag and a golf club being things that are interrelated, or also even people like the Terminator and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Both of those things are, that's actually the same entity, even though they have different actual words or language that describe them. And the third being the actual domain age, the authority of the site, meaning how many other times has this site talked about this subject, how many different pages on the site actually link to this individual page or the site itself. and essentially how do all those things kind of tie together in terms of the amount of time it's spent on the internet. What does the track record or the history look like it from on that page or on that site in terms of the types of traffic that it's gotten, and why do we think they've gotten that types of traffic, if you're thinking from Google's perspective. So recently with their Think with Google, we can get a little bit better idea of like what this looks like in terms of how Google is looking at it, and how we can kind of flip this around and say what types of content should we create and how do we kind of leverage this to our benefit. So Google's actually showing us what they're recording to determine this metric of search satisfaction. They don't come out and say search satisfaction here, but they do mention basically satisfying the searcher's intent. And we're going to get into that a little bit here in a minute, but you can start to tie these things together pretty fast. And what I think is interesting about it is when you start looking at how Google is looking at whether or not this person is finding what they're looking for. So they give you 4 different examples here. This one's Ava, and she's been searching long after she's actually bought something, and they're kind of walking you through how they're observing her behavior. And what I really want to point out here is this piece right here, and that is none of the stuff that Google is measuring here is the data that you have. So bounce rate or time on page, or pretty much any metric that you would either get through Google Analytics or Search Console is not what Google is looking at here. They're looking at the direct relationship between the person that's searching for things and the websites they go to, and then their interactions back with basically Google and the search engine. So they go to site 1, they come back to the search engine. They go to site 2, they come back to the search engine. They disappear, they come back tomorrow. They search for a related entity or something else. These are the types of things that Google measures over time to be able to figure out whether or not they're doing a good job of providing results. Something that would be very hard for someone to manipulate or optimize around. So this is a really good example. Some of you may be somewhat familiar with this concept, what's called pogo sticking. It's the idea of just, bouncing up and down. So it's been kind of debated for a long time about whether or not it's an actual metric for searcher intent, or if it's an actual metric that Google includes in search rankings. But I'm going to argue that it's not really important whether pogo sticking in of itself is relevant, because it's a part of this larger way that Google looks at it, which is search satisfaction, which means if you search for something like the paleo diet, let's say, and you click on the first result, and for whatever reason, the information that you're looking for there isn't good enough or isn't what you're looking for, and you go back to the search result, and then you click on the second result. And in that case, you find what you're looking for. Over a period of time, if Google's able to determine that that second result seems to provide people with the information they're looking for, because then when they come back, they actually don't search for anything else paleo diet related, or maybe they do. Maybe they do search for paleo diet recipes now. Google might not even think that's a bad thing, understanding that, hey, this searcher was looking for the paleo diet. They went to one site, they didn't find anything, went to the second site, and then they came back and searched for something else. That second page may have done a good job of explaining the diet to the point to where someone either now wants to act on it, or maybe Google thinks that based on the next query, that page helped them better understand that the paleo diet in of itself isn't actually the information they're looking for. They're looking for something else. Now, Google may take and do with that information a lot of different things, but for a site that's creating content, one of the things you want to think about is what is the most expert advice or content or data that you can provide someone that is coming to your site as the result of multiple different queries. And it's really important in this case to start to understand the 5 different types of intent that Google specifically has outlined before. Because if you understand this intent, it's very, very easy then to kind of backfill what types of queries that you're going to be trying to provide information around. So first is probably one of the ones that I think is the lowest hanging fruit and probably lends itself to a lot of the folks that are sitting in the room today, which means that either you or someone else inside of your organization is probably an expert in the types of content or the types of information that your customers are looking for. Meaning, if I make tactical backpacks, let's say I'm just a marketer that's off the street and I don't know very much about tactical backpacks. If I work for a company that makes them, there's probably a really good chance that there's somebody in there that can walk you through every zipper on the bag, every buckle that's there, and explain to you why they made it that way. And I think being able to have that type of expertise is really important for informational intent, because people are going to be looking for things like what's the best tactical backpack, or what type of material is waterproof if you're going to go on a long hike, what types of how big of a bag would you need. There's all types of information that your customers are probably going to be looking for, and some of it may not even be related directly to buying behavior. They're basically trying to figure out and solve problems for themselves. And when you think about the reason why a product exists to begin with, it's to usually solve a problem. And so throughout my career, my tried and true formula has been to answer the questions that my customers have and then retarget them through display via CPM. So you can usually target people with CPM display ads at a very, very inexpensive cost. And then, your customers will always say, they follow me around the internet, they must be spending a fortune. It's very inexpensive, especially if you don't have a giant audience. And so this type of content is kind of the cornerstone of that strategy. Commercial types of queries are going to be a little bit different. They are things like the best, tactical backpack, or, tactical backpack prices, or tactical backpacks near me. These are things where people are going to be directly searching for products. And not only should you have product listings on your site, even if you don't have direct e-commerce ability through your site. So let's say you sell something that's like a bigger ticket item that you don't directly sell through your website. You still want to be able to have product listings on there. And in some cases, you may want to do something like, if it's a WordPress website or something along those lines, you may want to implement something like WooCommerce on there and actually set up your products on the site itself as if you were going to sell them. You don't have to actually have a buying option or take people through a checkout process, but it's one of the easiest ways to add the rich data to your site for product listings and things like that. So if you search in Google and you look, you see listings of products at the top of results before you even get to the organic results. In many cases, those are just product listings directly from different sites that they've pulled down. And as I mentioned at kind of getting started here, not only is it that you don't want to be on page 2, but even being on page 1 isn't good enough anymore because of the way that Google is dominating the knowledge graph these days. And then you have navigational. So this is when people are looking for specific parts of a page or something that they're looking for specific. In a lot of cases, this is to your brand, or it may even be something specific to a location or something that you provide to. So let's say there's an event that you're a part of. So let's say there's a outdoor mountain bike race, and your company is one of the largest sponsors of it. So people are probably going to be looking for registration information, maps of the event, all kinds of different ancillary information that might be related. Now, you would expect them to get that from the event provider, but in many cases, the event provider is not providing everything. So they might not provide a map of the course. They may not provide a FAQ for first timers. They may not provide a list of nearby hotels. So these are all different types of content that you could create that are navigational in nature, that give you the ability to provide some level of expertise as it relates to a topic. Obviously, if you're sponsoring the event, you're probably going to understand quite a bit about it. Hopefully there's people inside of your organization that are really familiar with it. You can kind of leverage that to figure out what types of, things are people going to be looking for prior to this event. And once again, you can start to implement the type of strategy of, they land on your page, and then you can retarget them through display if you do any display advertising or anything like that. And if you don't, I encourage it. If you're spending money on advertising, I would definitely do that. Transactional. So this is when people are basically trying to do, and probably in most of your industries, comparative stuff. So one of my biggest, one of the things, and I think I might touch on this a little bit later, is one of the things I really like is versus content. So in many cases, if you're a brand, you don't want to create content where it's like, I'll use my tactical backpack. Let's say I have Tyler's tactical backpacks. I might not want to compare it to, Fast Pack, which is a, maybe competing tactical backpack manufacturer. So I might not want to create content that compares me to a competitor. Number one, it seems lame. I'm going to write my own content comparing my product to somebody else's. But I could compare what I can say is the category of backpack that I have versus maybe the category of backpack they have. So I could say, waterproof tactical backpacks versus ordinary tactical backpacks, if I want to be real egregious with it. But you can find different versions of that I think make a lot of sense, that work well for your products. But people are basically trying to figure out, in a lot of cases, like, how much does a tactical backpack even cost? Can you buy them online? Information like that. People may not have understanding of the buying behavior associated with your products, and you may be surprised to learn that that's information that might not be common knowledge to some of your customers, or even what you would qualify as maybe like early stage customers or beginning customers. Some of you may have people for the very first time that are just researching and starting to buy your products. Others maybe not. And that type of content and being able to kind of put yourselves in their shoes and interview customers to get information from them. That's one way to look at creating expert content for those. So when I was starting to put this together, I was trying to imagine kind of like what everyone's expectations might be. And, SEO always comes with, people think of keywords and doing keyword research. And I know that keyword research is a building block of a lot of the things that we're talking about. But to be honest, there's nothing that makes me more bored or something that makes my eyes glaze over more than talking about keyword research. There are literally billions of resources online of people that are super smart that'll walk you through this. It'll take you 5 seconds to find a YouTube video or an article where someone goes super in depth to the point to where having me just talk about it today would be a waste, because you could just go and reference any of those things and take action on it. The vast majority of my SEO knowledge really came from following people on Twitter, reading blogs, educating myself over time, and actually looking at real search results based on things that we had done or changed and used keyword research to accomplish. And it wasn't only till later that I really had a chance to work with Google on a lot of different projects and start to get a deeper insight into how a lot of things work. And the more and more that I spend time on these things, the more and more that I move away from thinking of things as technical SEO. I think of that as really keeping a clean house. My content is sort of the stuff that really matters. And the technical SEO, the house part of it, is really the keeping a website that's crawlable, keeping everything in order, not having tons and tons of pages that I've duplicated and maybe I don't have it in my navigation, but they exist someplace else to where they're still getting indexed. Like, trying to keep things clean. It's basically trying to be a good webmaster. And one of the best ways to do that is to, use a tool like Screaming Frog or any of the number of free SEO audit tools that are out there, and just crawl your site to make sure you just don't have a bunch of pages where you're like, why does this page still exist? And things along those lines. So when you start thinking about SEO in terms of keywords and domain authority and all the things that I'd kind of mentioned earlier, is, when you think of expertise in SEO terms, one of the first things that comes up is what is and isn't a ranking factor. And I'll make the argument that who cares? It doesn't matter. And I'll give you a good example of why I think that it's not as important to worry about what is and isn't a ranking factor, and to focus more on what is and isn't something that's going to basically drive more organic traffic to your site. So I would argue that the best thing to do is start thinking about the types of questions you need to answer. So think about those types of searcher intent and think about the types of expertise you have access to. Do you have access to data? Do you have access to experts? And if not, you probably have access to customers. At least I hope you do. And you can use all of those things as different sources of information. And then you really need to understand what are the topics and what are the questions related to those topics that you want to cover and that you want to create content around. So SEO is really a part of a larger strategy that I think about to basically create sales. It's planting the seeds that are going to ultimately make me an expert in the types of questions and things like that that customers have. So they'll come to me to answer their questions, and when they're ready to buy a product, they will. And so this is probably one of the best examples of what I just mentioned, which is CTR a ranking factor? Is something a search factor or not? So Google says it's not. And if you listen to any of the SEO experts that are on social media or Twitter, you know, somebody like Rand Fishkin comes to mind, who basically is willing to die on this hill that CTR is a ranking factor. This is also where the pogo sticking idea comes from. But when you think about it in terms of search satisfaction, is CTR a ranking factor? Google might say no, but if they're actually looking at someone clicking on a result and then they're trying to figure out what happens next, CTR probably plays into that. Maybe not in every instance, and it's probably not something to necessarily optimize around. But at the end of the day, who cares? Because if you have a search result that has, you know, like let's say a 1% CTR, and let's say your ranking position stays exactly the same, but you double it, and now you have a 2% CTR, you literally start getting twice as much traffic, assuming that the impressions on the number of queries are the same. So if you get 500 people searching for something and you get a 1% click-through rate, you get 5 clicks. If you get a 2% click-through rate, you get 10 clicks. You doubled your traffic, all just by improving CTR, and it didn't have to be a ranking factor. And so the point is a lot of the things that we think about as ranking factors may or may not be, but improving them nonetheless are the types of things that you can do that may improve your traffic overall. And a lot of that really stems from fundamentally giving people what they want. So a tool that I like, some people hate it because they're just like, I just don't like the format. I don't like the way that it presents the information. But I really enjoy it. It's called Answer the Public. And so it's free. You can use it for free for a number of different searches. After that, it's paid, but it's not overly expensive. And basically what it does is allows you to put in different subjects or topics. So I think I put in remote presentation. And so it starts giving me back, these are the types of queries and these are the types of things that are popular for when around this topic or this entity. So Google Trends has a unique identifier associated with it. So whenever you type something into Google Trends, if you type Ezoic in, you're going to see how the topic of Ezoic has trended over time, not just the keyword. And they're basically pulling that from entities. So there's an ID in there, and Ezoic might be 9576543, and it's going to associate that entity maybe with Tyler Bishop. So they know that Tyler Bishop is tied to, entities ID subject 945, whatever number I just said. And they'll know those two things are tied together. And so remote presentations in this case has been are tied to all these different types of queries. And you can see some of them use the keyword and some of them have different variations of it. And you can get a better idea of this is what people want when you start talking about this topic. So some of these questions might be answered with one piece of content. Some of them might be answered with like multiple series of pieces of content. But once you start identifying the topics that people are interested in or the types of topics that you want to cover with your content, you can start looking for what types of questions are people answering, what types of queries do people have in search, and then you can start figuring out, okay, if people want to use an iPhone as a remote for presentations, that's a completely different thing than giving a good remote presentation. But let's just focus on the iPhone as a remote for presentations. Someone that's looking for that is probably looking for how do they do that. So just trying to rank for the term iPhone as a remote for presentations is probably not going to be near as effective as trying to figure out, okay, this person is trying to figure out if they can use an iPhone is remote for presentations. Well, they probably want to know how to do it in Google Slides and in PowerPoint. Also, if they're using a Mac, there's the Mac thing. I forget what it's called. I'm on a Mac right now, but I can't even remember what their version of Slides is. It's like, I don't know. It's Keynote. You got it. Thank you. And so you're probably going to want to cover how to do it for all those different subjects as well. And so being able to provide that level of expertise to that type of query is going to be really, really helpful as opposed to just focusing on the keyword research. But it starts to get harder and harder when context is difficult to spot. So let's say, Tyler, hey, I'm in a super competitive niche and my competitors or the other people that rank for this content, I'm going up against Wikipedia or I'm going up against this big site. They've got way more backlinks. They've existed for way longer. How could I ever compete? And so I'm going to give you a case study here. We're going to say domain A and domain B. So domain A, it has 330% more links to the page. The keyword density is high, but not egregious. The Moz domain authority, if you don't know what that is, it's just it's Moz's own proprietary score of what they have basically taken Google's old PageRank algorithm and basically said they've created a 100 scale of what they think, all those different criteria that, Google's original patent was on as it relates to website authority, and they've created their own. Either way, people use it in the industry as a way of kind of attributing the authority that a certain domain has, domain age, the number of backlinks that it has, its expertise on different subjects. So it has a domain authority of 67. The page was 54, and it has a word count of about 1,800. Domain B, lower domain authority. It has much fewer backlinks that are pointing to it. The keyword density is lower. It actually didn't, I think in this exact one, it didn't actually even use the keyword in its full instance. It had just abbreviations of it. And the word count was about 1,200. So by, all those different things that, people always, those are some of the four. If you were to ask people what types of things are associated with good SEO, people would say, well, things that rank well are things that have lots of backlinks. They have good keyword targeting, the domain authority is high, and word count is debatable. It matters in some instances more than it does in others, but usually when you're talking about expertise, long form articles, the higher the word count, things will be a little bit better off. But actually result A ranks number 12 in Google and B ranks number 2. So you may go, well, Tyler, let's see what these were, because my guess is, A is just not as good, or, who knows. But actually, there are things that I'm trying to figure out right now, because I have a Shiba Inu puppy at home, and he is a challenge, especially as it relates to howling in the middle of the night, or barking when people come over, or just deciding that he's gonna get my running shoes down off the top of his kennel. And so if there's somebody there that makes running shoes or hiking footwear or something like that, you're gonna get some business from me at the end of today, because my Shiba Inu puppy ruined mine this morning. So this is something that's actually top of mind to me right now. And I looked at both of these sites really, really closely. And to be honest, if you were to ask me objectively, it's really hard to pick one that I thought was better than the other. They both provided what I thought was almost the exact same information, and they were both good. So looking at them both, especially knowing that A has greater domain authority and backlinks, and the content was longer, I'm kind of at a loss. I just kind of go, well, Google, they're Google, who knows? But Google actually has something pretty cool here that allows us to take a sneak peek at why this might be the case. So what you're looking at here is something that anyone can use. And at the end of my presentation, I think I have a link to this. If not, it's on the next slide. But it's how do we get objective data on how Google is reading the language and the entities on our page. And Google Cloud has this cloud natural language demo that they let you have. So you don't have to buy a subscription to Google Cloud. In this demo, you can actually use this to do some pretty cool SEO hacks. So you can derive insights from basically the text that's on your page and the text that's on competitor pages to figure out, like, is Google understanding that my content is about this or that? And you can start to see what types of words and what types of information Google's picking out to identify as, we know this page is about X or Y. And you can figure out, if you have a page that's ranking above you, you can look and see basically what gaps do you have in terms of topics that you're discussing. So obviously both articles talk about dogs, but does one article mention that Shiba Inus were originally bred to be hunting dogs? Do they mention the fact that Shiba Inus are originated in Japan? Do they mention the fact that, you know, Shiba Inus and Huskies and Akitas are all closely related? These are all kind of phrases or long tail keywords, if you will, that Google associates with more expert level content on a subject. So you can see in this case, looking at A, the word puppy is actually, the sentiment is it's quite a bit different. So you can see the magnitude is 0.1 for B, it's 4.4 for puppy or for dog. So in A, the number one and number two things that they identified as being like the subject of the article is puppy and then run. And so for B, it was dog and Shiba Inu. And so Google's using that natural language to be able to understand, like, reading from this content, it's not using the word dog. It's how many things in this article are tied to the dog entity. So it's talking about dogs or dog related things. Same thing with Shiba Inu. And so when someone's looking for train a Shiba Inu, if you're Google and you look at just this, you know, let's pretend there's, you know, a long line of these after this, which there is. But if you just looked at these two things and you were to say, our natural language matching said, you know, this was the number one and number two entities that were tied to the information in this article. And then B, it was these two. Which one would you pick for someone that was looking for a train to Shiba Inu? You're probably going to pick B. And I think that that's one of the things that you can actively do is start putting your content, your competitors' content into these types of, you know, demos that Google offers to be able to understand, am I really getting across and talking about the topics or including the subjects that, you know, the person that's writing this query is interested in? You know, we're thinking about the iPhone presentation earlier. You know, if you take the number one result and you throw it into results there and you see the word Google Slides or you see the word PowerPoint and your article doesn't include those topics or those subjects, you're probably not going to be able to rank as high because your competitors are actually touching on these things and Google obviously is finding them to be important. Another example of kind of, you know, looking at these, they give you categories. So Google will tell you through the natural language matching what category they think the content falls in. So it'd be really important to know that there's a pets and animals category and that your content was or wasn't in it if you're writing content about how to train a Shiba Inu. So result A, their content was identified as being in the category of hobbies and leisure, and B was in pets and animals, pets, and then there's these subcategories where it's like pets and dogs. And so, you know, if you're trying to identify what type of content to create, you know, my guess is most of you could probably pick out what categories you feel like your content should be in. And using a tool like this, it's pretty easy to kind of like go backwards and work towards that. So what matters most here, you've got all these quote unquote SEO ranking factors that you can look at, backlinks and, you know, word count, and are they factors, are they not? But realistically, the people that are looking for this stuff are people like me. And I have a Shiba Inu puppy at home, but I also have a 10-year-old Shiba Inu named Toast. And she's not trained either. Like she still kind of does her own thing. She halfway listens to me. If she's hungry, she listens a little bit better. But I still need to train her, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. And so Google is really most interested in connecting me to the person that has the best expert content. And so you can do all the keyword research in the world. You can build lots and lots of backlinks. You can build your domain authority. But at the end of the day, it's your content and Google's ability to identify it as expert level content that's going to be able to figure out whether or not that's what I've done or not. And so again, it comes back to finding experts and connecting those experts to the types of queries and information that your customers are actually looking for. So actually that's the URL if you want to use these tools in the demo to be able to look at things like syntax and sentiment by category, and then all the different entities, which are usually words or phrases that Google's tying together on your site. So whenever we go back and we start to think about earlier when I was talking about searcher intent, we can look at this too, where you can basically figure out, like, Google is going to not only look at the entities and the sentiment, but it's going to look at the syntax and be able to figure out, is someone basically asking a question? Are they trying to figure out the answer to something? Are they comparing something? Are they shopping? Are they, what is the intention of even the information they're trying to find? And this will give you even a better idea of whether or not your content is doing that. There's been multiple times I've taken my content and putting it in here and thought my content is better than the person that ranks ahead of me, and Google is just doing a bad job. And then you put it into a tool like this and you start to see where your holes are and where you may have gaps in terms of the types of content, or even just honestly, the content itself. You might look at it and you might say, well, that's fair. I actually didn't touch on this very much, but I wasn't actually sure if I should. It gets kind of subjective, but then you can see it right here in front of you. This is how a machine is looking at this information, and you can take action on that. So you really want to ask the question of how do you provide the expert answers to the types of queries that the customers that you have are trying to ask? And in this current day and age, the answers may not look like how they've looked for the last decade, which is like an organic search result. Most results in search, the number one result now looks like this. It's a piece of rich data. And so if you search how to give a great remote presentation, this is the result you're going to get. You're going to get this link here to the Harvard Business Review Ascend program. And you can see they've got some tips here. They've got 5, and it says to make your remote presentation more interesting to your listeners than their inboxes are. You need to simulate physical connection, excel at audio, remove distractions, lure in your listeners, delight your audience. I don't know if I'm doing any of those things well, but either way, the next piece of that is identifying and realizing that if you're trying to find a way to be this number one result here, you need to really think about what types of information is Google putting in here. It's the answer to the question, but like, let's pretend I actually know how to give a good remote presentation and you were to ask me advice. I might give you an answer that's fairly long and long-winded. It might be in a paragraph. If you were to ask me to write it out for you, I'm going to probably type it out to you in like an email, and I'm going to use traditional writing structure. But if you start like poking around Google SERPs, search engine results pages, quite a bit, you're going to find that in many cases, they're using bullets, numbered lists, tables, and essentially they're pulling content directly from the page where someone might say something exactly or somebody might say something as exact as to make your remote presentation more interesting, you need to, this is bolded on the page, and then right underneath it are these bulleted lists. So when someone is searching for that exact thing, you have that question on the page followed by the answer, and it's provided in a condensed and easy to understand format, which usually includes some kind of markup on the page, HTML stuff, strong tags, limited lists, numbered lists, all kinds of different ways that you can kind of structure information that way. But then you start to ask the question of, well, what about domain authority? What about the authority as it relates to the site itself? There's all these different topics that are out there or competitors that are out there, Tyler, that are going to rank for these topics way over me. And that may be the case, but the truth is that every query, things like domain authority are going to matter quite a it's going to vary in terms of how important it is for different types of queries. So right now, if you search for Trump, the chances of the author bio, the domain age, and by author bio, I mean who wrote the article, not the actual bio on the page. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But who wrote the article? What is the article on? Is it on Fox News or Market Watch, or is it on, BillyBobBlog.com, and the backlinks, et cetera? Those things are probably going to matter quite a bit with an article about Trump, because Google is going to scrutinize what types of information it pushes to the top of results for those types of queries quite a bit, because it's a very politically charged one. It's one that probably gets searched a lot. It's probably one that's associated a lot with things like fake news, which they've tried to combat a lot in recent years. But if I'm looking for the best carrot cake recipe, my guess is Google's going to be a lot less concerned about who wrote that, the domain age, the backlinks, et cetera. And my guess is there's a lot of different types of queries that your customers have, where even if you don't have a lot of domain authority, you've never built a backlink in your life, and you may not have an expert on hand that's written the article, there's a really good chance that those types of things and those types of queries are things that you can rank for pretty easily. And so you can get things like this, where Zapier is not something that's, it's not a low domain authority site. They're a prominent technology provider or whatever, but they're ranking #1 here for the best remote presentation software, above G2 Crowd and, a lot of those other software review sites that are often at the top of results that have really, really high domain authority, tons of backlinks, and a lot of different types of authority metrics. And once again, what they're doing is they're providing an easy answer to this type of question. And you can also think, if we go back to our Trump SERP here, you can see there's things at the top. You've got news, but you've also got this rich box here on the right-hand side. You've got it linking to Twitter. You can kind of see here down on the bottom, there's these rich data boxes here that take you to direct tweets that he's had and things along those lines. So the search results have changed a lot. And so what you get is these rich markups where you've got images in some and images not in others. And one of the things you want to think about is, when you're starting to create expert content for these queries, is how do I create something that is going to be listed in the rich data box or the knowledge graph of Google? So if you're trying to rank for the best remote presentation software, whenever you talk about this in your article here on the blog, not only do you have the bulleted list here of the different software that you can potentially use, but right above that, you may want to have an image inside of that section, and you may want to put the alt tag as the best remote presentation software. You may want to include pictures of all these different softwares underneath in a gallery. You may want to try to put them in a table. You may want to include the pricing. But all these things give you different ways to start to answer the questions that people might have. Because someone might ask, what's the best remote presentation software? And Google may learn over time, people really want to just know what the cost of these different softwares are, or they may want to know the best free remote presentation software. So being able to touch on those subjects within the article is important as well. And not only that, when you answer those questions, so, the best presentation software is listed here with a bunch of different bullets underneath. You may want to do one underneath, and you can say, but the best free presentation software is these ones, and then list them again. And this gives you more and more opportunities to rank in this 0 position or #1 position here in Google. So what matters whenever you search for something like this? Well, it's content authority, topic authority. Have you indexed multiple pages on these similar topics? This is how Google is going to look at authority in reality. It's going to figure out, have they talked about these subjects or these entities before? And those pages on their site, and this is just, I'm not going to go super into detail on this, but do those pages on that site also link to each other, basically, internal linking? So if you've written about remote presentation software and on other pages, but kind of maybe with a different slant or answering different questions, do those pages all connect? Is Google able to see that you have a track record of writing about this content on your site? Content comprehensiveness. This goes back to the natural language matching that we were talking about earlier, where you can basically figure out, like, are you touching on all the different subjects or entities that Google thinks is associated with this? When you type in Shiba Inu in there, what entities are associated with it? It might be dog, Japan, puppy. Those are the types of, comprehensiveness that Google might expect from your content, because it may say, when someone is writing about this topic, we expect these entities to be in there. That's how we know it's comprehensive. Google's been pretty forthright about the fact that that's how they rank news. So whenever you're in Google and you're looking for news about Trump, and you're like, why did they list the Fox News one ahead of the NBC one? Is Google biased? Google has been pretty transparent about the fact that what they are looking at there is primarily which one of the articles is more comprehensively covering the topic. So if they're both covering Trump's latest press conference on the coronavirus, they're probably going to take the one that maybe includes additional information. They're going to look at the entities on the page and say, hey, this one touched on the World Health Organization classifying it as a pandemic, and this one didn't. That might have been an important part of the press conference. We're going to rank the one that actually included that topic in the article above the other one. And that also includes things like rich data that supports the things that we talked about at the very beginning, which is search satisfaction. Google learns that the searchers for these topics prefer getting the data in fast lists or numbered formats. They may say that that's one of the ways that they can prove that people are getting the search they're looking for satisfied. That in some cases might mean you miss out on traffic because they get the answer straight from the search result. But you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You've got to at least be invited to the dance. And so when given the choice between ranking in the knowledge graph and not ranking in the knowledge graph, there's been studies done. You're better off in that spot than not. And so this is kind of what I talked about a little bit earlier, but domain authority in general, it's going to be a lot more important when you're searching for things that require a certain amount of authority, that, topical stuff, news, but it's going to be a lot less important for things like the skateboard tricks or even things in many of the niches that you're in for products, as long as it's not something, you're not selling financial advice or services or something, that's, filled with lots of misinformation. Domain authority and things like that may not be all that important, but if they are, it's really important that you identify expertise in your space and help Google understand that you are purveyors of that expertise. And I'll touch on this, just one more thing real quick on this line is basically, if you do have experts, Google is not going to read an author bio at the bottom of your page and say this person was or wasn't an expert. But what they will be able to do is identify links on the page and then tie entities to records that they have. So if your article on the best tactical backpack was written by a Navy SEAL that invented the backpack, you may want to just link to their LinkedIn page where you can identify that they were a Navy SEAL or something like that, or include a picture of them that maybe is used at other parts of the internet, where you can identify that, this is somebody that is an expert in survival gear or something like that. If you ever do a Google image search and you notice, you've got a lot of the same picture of someone, it's because Google is really good at matching images across the web. Most of us kind of know that now. And one of the things you can do is when you use author bios is if you can use existing pictures of experts that you have on the page, those are the types of things that Google actually can recognize. Images, links, things like that. Google's probably not going to read a author bio and be like, oh, it says this person's a doctor. They must be really smart when it comes to medical stuff. Most likely, they're just going to be able to look at your links and images. Moving on to one last thing before we kind of get wrapped up here. And that is basically, I always try to convince people that it's worth the push to go for it, essentially. Meaning like, don't not try to create content that you're concerned you won't ever be able to rank #1 for because somebody else is beating you. And that's because we've actually done some studies here, and we've repeated this a couple different times and keep finding the same thing. But basically, we looked at small sites, and they generally, when they're creating content, so these are all small to medium-sized publishers, On average, they produce about an eighth as much content as the big guys did. On average, the group grew their organic traffic in 2018 by about 34%, and they ranked for, on average, about 1,300 new keywords at the end of the year. And when they competed against the Alexa top 1K, so, you know, your Wikipedias and, you know, the big brands of the world, they beat them by quite a bit. They're, the Alexa top 1K publishers did not do much better. Actually, I don't have the chart of that one in here, but the Alexa top 1K publishers in a large instance are actually losing traffic. So, you know, I'm trying to think good examples. Cosmopolitan, who I'm sure not many of you compete with, they lost traffic, but a lot of sites that kind of fall in those categories, they were seeing declines in organic traffic. In a lot of cases, it's because the small to medium-sized publishers are creating more, they're creating longer content with greater expertise. So in a lot of cases, they're independent owner-operators that are passionate about stuff. So, you know, they may be the type of person that's right. They may be a former contractor writing about, you know, do-it-yourself home projects versus, you know, Home Depot or somebody like that that's just trying to check a box and, you know, knock some content out. You know, they're putting a little bit more TLC into it and really trying to provide true expertise. They're usually doing more how-to stuff. They're trying to answer more questions rather than try to, you know, get shared on social media. But what's funny is the content ends up getting shared a lot more on social media whenever you do have stuff that's not answering questions. And so if your goal is lots of social media content, it's not really all that sexy or appealing, and you won't see it very often that somebody's like, how to mend a fence, you know? Like, they're not going to share that content on social media, but they might make like the 5 mistakes that everyone makes mending a fence that could cost you your life. Like, that might be something that gets shared on social media. Maybe not a lot. I mean, I don't know what the market share for social media content on mending fences is, but yeah, you can tell I'm running out of good examples here. The biggest takeaway from this is essentially that low authority, you know, sites or small sites can definitely compete with the big ones. And it really comes down to being very direct in how you approach providing expert content. Google just crawls, indexes, and ranks. That's it. There's no conspiracies here. It's not reading author bios. It's not doing anything overly crazy that you may read about on the internet. The natural language matching that I shared with you earlier is probably a good way that it's tying entities together, but that search satisfaction metric that we were talking about at the very beginning, that's it. That's the big one. That's what they care about, is giving people the answers they're looking for. So I'll leave you with this. Before you create content, ask yourself these questions. What does my audience need? What are they looking for? And what expertise can you grab as a source of this? Is it your coworkers? Is it you? Is it your customers? And if you don't have that, where can you go get data? Where can you go have conversations with your customers? Where can you go find these experts so that you can get the content and bring it back? And if you're like, Tyler, I can get it, but I have to write it myself, reference them. I got this information from this Navy SEAL. Here's a picture of him. Here's a link to his LinkedIn profile. Here's the answers he gave me. And then you can put the answers as H2 headings, or the questions as H2 headings, and then you can provide the answers below. These are all different ways that you can insert that expertise and authority onto your site. So how do I format my content for my audience needs? On the next page here, I've actually created a writing guide based around basically everything that I've shared inside of this presentation. I've created kind of a step-by-step process for creating content that'll get rich snippets, that'll speak to expertise, that'll answer queries that your audience is looking for, and has like basically the guide is written in the example itself. So it's pretty helpful. It's been downloaded a lot by our customers, and I created a custom version for everybody here today. But just think about what types of other things you would need to tap into to provide this. Do you need to do video? Is that an advantage that you have? Do you have the capabilities of doing that? Do you need someone that can create infographics? Do you need some spreadsheet nerds that are going to be able to give you the data that you need? And can you put it into tables on your site so people can share it or copy paste it or use it as a reference? These are the types of things that you can do to kind of insert a little bit more, inject a little bit more authority into your content. So I mentioned my free writing guide. If there's anything you can take away from this time with me, at least get that. I think it would be really helpful. The keyword tools that I really like are Answer the Public, which is free. SEMrush, Keyword Magic Tool is a pretty good one too if you don't like the format of Answer the Public. Again, both of those you get free for a little bit, and then you got to pay if you want to use it a whole bunch. And then last is Google's free natural language cloud tool, which my guess is if everything else I've said in this presentation, you're like, yeah, I already knew that. Hopefully that's something that's fairly new to most of you and something you can kind of play around with and find some value in. And that's it. I'm pressing the space bar and nothing else is happening. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Welcome back.